Cold gray October. Wet leaves. With smoke drifting off the ridge. 40 relatives sat at the long tables behind the main house, plates steaming, when Richard Bennett raised one finger and pointed it down the lane toward the county road. No shouting. He never shouted. He didn't have to. Nobody at those tables stood up. Nobody said my name. My aunt kept passing the rolls. My brother studied his plate like it owed him money. I turned and walked back toward the gravel shoulder, and behind me 40 people went back to their lunch like I'd been a delivery driver at the wrong address. What none of them knew was that a white car was already turning off the county road. Moving slow. In no hurry at all. And the woman inside it had been waiting 7 years for my father to do exactly what he'd just done. I'm Grace. I'm 38. I'm a home care nurse, and this is the story of how one word, spoken at a farm gate, brought down a kingdom my father spent 40 years pretending was his. The car stopped beside me on the gravel, close enough that I could see my breath fog against its door. A driver stepped out and opened the rear like it was a hotel entrance, not a farm lane in the middle of nowhere. Then Helen Whitaker stepped out in a wool coat the color of good cream, my mother's oldest friend, the woman who'd built a chain of pharmacies out of one rented counter, the woman I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. She didn't hug me. She gripped my wrist once, the way nurses do when words cost too much. Then she looked past me, at the orchard going rust-colored on the hill, the long tables, the white porch, my father standing at the head of it all with his finger finally lowering. She took her time. Then she said one word, pitched to carry across a field without ever rising. Disinherited. That was all. My father's face went the color of the sky. 40 relatives stopped chewing at the same instant. Helen turned back to me like the rest of them were furniture. Not here, she said. Tomorrow. The diner on Route 9. 7 o'clock. You've been hungry a long time, honey. She got back in the car. Gravel popped soft under the tires as it eased away. My father was already shouting something behind me. I didn't turn around. That word took 7 years to build. To understand it, you have to go back to my mother's kitchen. My grandmother, Margaret, was 88 and lived alone in the old farmhouse 300 yards behind my father's house. She hadn't answered a letter of mine in 7 years. So when my cousin Rebecca texted me, Grandma fell again. Nobody will call a doctor. You're the only nurse this family ever made. I didn't decide to crash a family reunion out of loneliness. I was summoned. The reunion was the one day I was guaranteed to see Margaret out in the open, where I could check on her with my own eyes without setting foot in anyone's kitchen. My plan was to stand at the edge of the yard for 20 minutes and leave. What I hadn't planned for was my father moving her chair to sit beside his own that morning. No explanation. Which meant there was no path to my grandmother that didn't cross directly in front of him. The Bennetts ran 340 acres of orchard and cropland, apples and cider donuts and a packing barn by the road. My father ran all of it the way his father had. Low voice, straight back, and one rule spoken so often it might as well have been carved over the door. A family holds because one hand holds it. His hand, he meant. My mother, Eleanor, moved through that house like water finding the gaps in a wall. She kept a rose garden by the kitchen door he called a waste of good dirt, and every June it bloomed so hard you could smell it from the road. We weren't poor and we weren't unhappy. We were managed. Children feel the difference before they can name it. I felt it loudest. The fall I left for nursing school, my father wrote my name on the debit side of a book he kept in his head and stopped paying my phone bill as a lesson in economics. I went anyway, cleaned motel rooms, finished my degree owing nobody, which in his arithmetic was the worst thing I could have done, because a debt he couldn't hold was a daughter he couldn't steer. My brother James stayed, married the neighbor's daughter, learned the loan officer's first name, did everything right by the code. At Thanksgiving, our father handed him the first plate like a knighthood. Mine came fourth after a joke about city wages. And still I came home. Every holiday, pie and clean scrubs in my trunk. My mother walked me to my car every single time, pressed a rose cutting into my hand and said, "Plant it where you are." It took me 20 years to hear that sentence right. The real trouble started 9 years ago. Ovarian cancer stage 3. I rearranged my whole caseload to drive north every weekend, and within 2 weeks I learned how my father intended to fight it, the same way he ran the orchard. He sat in on every appointment. When the oncologist recommended a second opinion 2 hours away, he thanked the man, walked my mother to the truck, and told her on the drive home they weren't going to go shopping around for a diagnosis like it was a used tractor. I found out the same way I found out everything in that house. From Margaret over dishes in a voice pitched under the running water. So I called the university myself. Got an appointment in 11 days. 2 days before the date it vanished. Cancelled by phone. When I confronted him, he took his glasses off and said the sentence I still hear at odd hours. "You've been gone too long, Grace. You've forgotten how this family gets through things." For 2 years my mother got through things. That's the polite way to say it. By the spring she turned 58. The visits had shifted from fighting the cancer to negotiating with it, and I knew that sound from work. Good dying looks like pain-controlled questions answered, the person still steering. My mother had none of that. My father rationed her pills against a calendar. The word hospice came up once in her doctor's mouth, and he closed it like a storm window. "We keep our own," he said. One Sunday, at a card table in the parlor where she now slept, she held my hand and whispered the only direct request she ever made of me. I don't want to do the last part his way. So I stopped asking his permission. I called her doctor, and he told me plainly what I already knew. The only signature required was hers, not his. I brought the hospice intake nurse on a Tuesday morning while my father was at the co-op, and my mother signed her own name on her own kitchen table. He never forgave any of us. But those 6 weeks bought her mornings with her hands warm around a coffee cup. They bought Helen driving out twice a week to sit with her behind a closed parlor door. Once, passing that doorway, I saw paper spread across her blanket, Helen's reading glasses on, my mother signing something slow and careful with the good pen from the desk. I thought it was funeral planning. I let it be. She died on a Thursday before dawn, holding my hand, with my grandmother asleep in the chair beside us, while my father slept upstairs because he'd declared the parlor shift unnecessary. At the funeral lunch, 40 people balancing ham on their knees, he found me in the kitchen with a dish towel in my hands and said I had gone behind his back in his own house, that I had turned my mother's dying into my own project, and that a daughter who would do that had already left this family. She just hadn't had the decency to say so. "You are dead to this family." I folded the dish towel because my mother raised me to leave a kitchen right, and I drove 2 hours south with the radio off. Nobody walked me to my car. For 7 years I built a life out of work. The long-haul cases nobody else wanted. Every October on my mother's birthday week, I wrote my grandmother a letter. Real paper. Real stamp. "I am fine, Grandma." 6 letters. Not one answer. The 7th was writing in my glove box the morning I drove north for the reunion. 2 hours up. 20 minutes at the rim of my old life. 2 hours back. I parked on the shoulder like a subcontractor and saw Margaret immediately, not at the quiet end of the yard where Rebecca said she'd be, but at my father's right hand, a shawl over her shoulders, positioned like a centerpiece. I stood at the edge of the yard for 10 minutes, hands in my coat pockets, waiting for him to get busy with the cider press. He looked up anyway. Some men feel an unauthorized person on their land the way other people feel weather. He rose without hurry, walked to the edge of the yard, and raised one finger toward the road. "You're showing up where you aren't welcome," he said, not even loud. "You know the way back." And that's when the white car turned off the county road. The diner on Route 9 opens at 6 for the dairymen. At 7 sharp, Helen was in the corner booth with tea, looking like a bank had learned to sit down. On the table between us sat a plain manila folder, closed, squared to the edge like it had been placed with a level. "Your mother left me a to-do list," she said. 7 years long. Today is the last item on it. She opened the folder. Inside, in the order she laid it out between the ketchup and my untouched eggs, a deed history, a trust instrument thick as a hymnal, and 1 page of numbered instructions in my mother's looping hand. The 340 acres. The orchard. The packing barn. The main house with its proud white porch. The farmhouse where my grandmother lived. None of it, not 1 acre, had ever belonged to Richard Bennett. The land had come down through my mother's people, inherited by Eleanor from her father before I was born. She had never, in 40 years of marriage, put my father's name on it. He farmed it. He ruled it. He pointed at its road like a king. On paper, he was a tenant. And 8 months before she died, behind that closed parlor door, my mother had moved every acre into an irrevocable trust with exactly one trustee, the woman sitting across from me, stirring her tea. He knows, Helen said, watching me do the arithmetic. He's known since the month she died. She touched the corner of a second envelope inside the folder, cream paper, my name on it in my mother's hand, and moved it gently out of my reach. Not yet, she said. First, you need to see your grandmother. Getting to Margaret without lighting the farm on fire took planning worthy of a jailbreak. Rebecca timing my father's Monday co-op meeting down to the hour, walking me back through the windbreak so the main house couldn't see. When we came around the hedge and I got my first look at the farmhouse in 7 years, I stopped walking. Paint peeling off the porch posts. A gutter hanging by one strap. Grass to my shins where tomato rows used to stand. My grandmother was in her wing chair, hollow under the cheekbones, a bruise going yellow-green up her forearm, and on the table beside her, a saddest little pharmacy of pill bottles clustered like bowling pins, 2 of them from different towns. She looked at me a long moment, running through faces the way the very old do. Then she found mine. Eleanor's girl, she said, and her chin started to go. Grace. She gripped my hands harder than a woman that thin should have been able to. Then she said the thing that rearranged everything I thought I understood about the last 7 years. They told me you stopped writing, sweetheart. Why did you stop writing to me? I kept my voice level. Grandma, I never stopped. Not one October. She turned slowly, terribly, toward a blue butter cookie tin on the mantel, and made Rebecca take it down and put it in my lap. Open it, she said. Inside, in rubber-banded bundles, were letters. Dozens of them. Sealed, stamped, addressed to me in her careful schoolhouse cursive. Every single one unmailed. I gave them to your father to mail when he brought my groceries, she said. He'd tuck them in his shirt pocket, pat them flat, and I'd ask, any word from Grace? And he'd get that sorrowful look. No, Mother. She's moved on. I sat there holding 7 years of intercepted love with both hands. He hadn't even thrown them away. He'd collected them like rent. Gravel popped in the drive. One vehicle coming easy. Too early to be my father. It wasn't my father. Through the curtain, I watched my brother's truck roll to a stop by the porch, a coil of irrigation line in the bed as his alibi, back early from the far rows. I had maybe 2 minutes, and I spent them being a nurse. I photographed the bruise on my grandmother's arm, with her permission, offered up like a sleeve at a blood drive. I photographed the pill bottles. I read the labels, and my training put its cold hand flat on my back. Warfarin. A blood thinner. The kind that needs a dosing calendar, 1 pharmacy, 1 list, not 2 bottles from 2 towns and a last test date 14 months old. Boots hit the porch boards. I put my phone away and stood between my grandmother and the door. My brother filled the doorway the way our father used to. For 1 second his face was just plain glad to see me. Then he remembered whose son he was. You shouldn't be here, Grace, he said. He sat down heavy on the ottoman, rubbed his face with both hands. Saturday rattled him. That woman in her big car saying that word in front of everybody. He's been on the phone with lawyers since Sunday. You being in this house today is gasoline. You understand me? He stood at the door back to me and said the quiet part, the part that told me he'd known the stakes all along. There's another family meeting Saturday. Whatever your godmother thinks she's doing, Dad doesn't lose on his own land. His own land. Even then. Even knowing. The screen door banged behind him, and behind me my grandmother said, dry as a husk, you see how it is now, sweetheart. Everybody manages everybody. Nobody mails a thing. I drove home that night with the cookie tin on the passenger seat, and somewhere past the county line I pulled into a gas station under the canopy lights and made a call I'd been circling all afternoon. Not a report. Not yet. Just a question to the state line. A home care nurse laying out a case without names. Alone in a failing house. Unmonitored warfarin in duplicate bottles. Recent falls. A family controlling the mail, the pharmacy, the doctor visits. The woman on the line was quiet a moment. Then she asked if I understood what a mandated reporter was required to do. I said I'd be filing within the week. I sat there a long time after, watching moths bang against the lights, because I knew exactly how this would read at the main house. Not as a nurse doing what her license required. As the dead daughter, calling the government down on the family that buried her. My phone was still warm in my hand when it rang again. Helen. No greeting. Just the sound of a car door somewhere behind her voice. It's moving, she said. Saturday. The main house. All of them. He's called a family meeting to get ahead of it. A pause. Come. Item 7 needs a witness. The lease numbers Helen brought me told a story of their own. Callahan no Bennett Orchards owed the bank a little over $300,000 in operating debt, rolled over and rolled again. 2 of the last 5 seasons had been hail years. The cider donut money everyone thought was gravy had been servicing interest since before the pandemic. He's not a thief, Helen said, fair as a scale. He's a decent farmer in a brutal decade who will not, on pain of death, let anyone see a number. What the chart didn't explain was how an operation that deep in the red, paying rent at all, hadn't bled out years ago. I asked her flat out how it was still breathing. She looked out the window a long moment. Saturday, she said. That answer belongs to Saturday. When you hear it, you're going to want to be sitting down. The second half of it arrived by way of Rebecca and a truck door pocket. She'd borrowed my father's truck to haul feed, and folded around the registration she found a glossy brochure, Crestline Manor Affordable Residential Care. A business card for an outfit that arranged hunting leases on farmland, and a sticky note in his handwriting, Yellow Farmhouse, winterized by December. It took one phone call to understand what we were looking at. Move Margaret to Crestline for her own safety. Lease her emptied farmhouse to hunters for cash. Then walk into the trust's 90-day window with a new argument. The old woman is a cost center now, an asset underperforming its square footage. That Monday, while my father was at the co-op, Rebecca drove Margaret to see Dr. Ray, who hadn't laid eyes on her in 14 months of always rescheduled appointments. He examined her for an hour. Blood draw. The wound on her shin properly dressed. And because Margaret asked for it herself, sitting straight in her cardigan, sharp as a tax auditor, he documented what the law calls capacity, that she was oriented, consistent, and competent to state her wishes. I was born on this place, she told him, hands folded. And I mean to leave it feet first from my own bed with the window open. Write that down, young man. He wrote it down. And in a small conference room with a notary and 2 witnesses, my grandmother signed a healthcare power of attorney naming me her agent. Her idea. Her hand. Her wit fully intact. It unraveled by Wednesday, and by the dumbest possible thread, the pharmacy. Dr. Ray's office consolidated her prescriptions to one location, and the pharmacy called the number on file to confirm. The landline. The main house. My father listened, thanked the girl kindly, and hung up. That evening my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in 7 years. I let it ring twice before answering because a person is allowed 2 rings to become a professional. Whatever paper you had her sign, he said, no hello. You'll be tearing it up. His voice climbed into something I'd never heard from him. Trespass, elder abuse. A stranger confusing a senile old woman into signing things. He'd have the sheriff explain it to me. My employer might want to know what kind of nurse did this. I let it land, cataloging the way I do. He couldn't evict her. She was on trust land. The POA was notarized, witnessed, physician documented. The report was already filed. His voice dropped a full tone, almost gentle. That's the register where my father keeps his weather. Saturday, he said. Come if you want. Watch me feed what's left of you to this family. The line clicked. Saturday came in gray again, as if October only stalked the one color. Cars lined the lane. Not 40 relatives, just the inner ring. I parked on the shoulder out of habit and walked up the lane my father had pointed me down 2 weeks before. They were seated when I came in. Papers squared in stacks on the long table. Helen to one side in her cream coat, patient as an invoice. My father at the head of the room, tall as ever, smiling like a man who'd spent the week sharpening something. He went first, of course. And I have to hand it to him, it was good. He grieved rather than raged. Certain arrangements, he said, had been made around the family land by outsiders, and he'd carried that quietly for 7 years to spare everyone the ugliness. But now the ugliness had driven up the lane in a car, and its timing was no accident. Ask yourselves, he said, looking at me for the first time, why the daughter who abandoned this family turns up the same week the lawyers do. Ask who called the county on her own blood. Heads turned to me on one string. I said nothing because Helen had told me not to, and because I was watching the one thing in the room my father couldn't manage, Helen unfolding her reading glasses without hurry, the way a surgeon lays out a tray. Thank you, Richard, she said, like he'd introduced her at a luncheon. I'll be quick. None of this is complicated. It's only been kept from you. She read the quiet facts in a quiet voice and let the facts do the yelling. The land under that table had been Merrill, Whitfield land, she said, since before any Bennett sat down on it. It passed to Eleanor from her father. It never passed to Richard. 7 years ago, Eleanor placed every acre into a trust. Since her death, the farm had operated on a lease from that trust. Lease, she repeated, and I watched the word travel around the table until it reached my brother. James's head came up slowly. We farm rented dirt, he said, quiet, but it cracked in the middle. 20 years I've put my back into this place. And you knew. My father kept his eyes on Helen. Family business gets handled by the head of the family. That's how it's always been done. Yes, Helen said, mild and terrible. That is exactly what Eleanor thought you'd say. She read the terms into the silence, evenly without triumph. As of the notice sent Monday, Richard Bennett was removed as a permissible beneficiary of the trust, from distributions, from succession, from any interest in any acre. The lease to the orchard would not renew on current terms, market rate, or vacate within 90 days. And the yellow farmhouse and its acre were withdrawn from the lease entirely, effective immediately. No one leased Margaret's home. No one won it in a family meeting. The trust, Helen added, looking at nobody in particular, has been made aware of certain plans for its occupant. She didn't name the brochure. She didn't need to. I watched the back of my father's neck learn that she knew. It was my aunt's husband who asked the question I'd already asked at a coffee shop off the interstate. If the rent was low, fine, but low rent didn't keep a farm that deep in debt alive for 7 years. Something didn't add up. You're right, Helen said. It was never meant to add up. It was meant to be carried. For 7 years, the trust had quietly absorbed what the operation couldn't pay. In the Hale years, it had made the loan payments itself twice, rather than let the farm go under. By instruction of Eleanor Bennett, written before she died. Keep the farm breathing. Keep his standing in the county intact. And never tell him where the heir was coming from. Unless what? My aunt whispered. Helen looked down the table at my father, and her voice stayed level, which made it the loudest thing I've ever heard in that house. Unless he used the family against one of his own children again, publicly, the way he did at his wife's funeral lunch. Eleanor wrote the condition herself. He met it at that gate in front of 40 witnesses. Your kingdom has run on a dead woman's kindness for 7 years, Richard. It ran out this morning. He stood up slow and terribly calm, buttoned his jacket and smiled. And that was not the face of a beaten man. That was a man reaching for the last piece on the board. Fine, he said, pleasant as a foreclosure notice. The trust owns the dirt. The trust can own what's on it. He turned to his sisters-in-law, voice sorrowful again. His mother-in-law was failing. Confused. He'd carried her care alone all these years. And now the county was involved, opening cabinets, and did they know who'd done that? He pointed at me. From today I'm done gatekeeping. No more groceries from my kitchen. No more rides. Whoever wants the old woman can have the old woman. He said it in front of God and everyone, and the room did not get up and walk out. My aunt looked at me, not him, and asked why I couldn't have just left things be. My brother caught me on the porch afterward. 41 years old, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week, which I'd learned was roughly true. Market rent on top of $300,000 in debt is a dead farm walking, he said, working his cap brim in his hands. I did everything right. Married right, worked right, kept my mouth shut right. 20 years and I find out I'm a tenant on my own mother's dirt. Same as you found out you were mailing letters to a shirt pocket. He looked at the orchard going dark. One of us left and one of us stayed, and it bought us the same thing. Nothing. I told him I was sorry and meant it, for him, for his wife, for the crew. He nodded once and walked back into a house that was never going to be his either. The retaliation came fast. A complaint to the State Board of Nursing, undue influence, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, filed the way anyone can file one, for free with no proof required, and it sat on my license like a lien while my agency quietly pulled 2 of my cases pending clarity. He could not touch the land, so he reached for the one thing I'd actually built with my own 2 hands. My lawyer went through everything: the case number, the photographs, the capacity note, the notarized POA, and said the sentence I'd been white-knuckling for. Boards don't discipline nurses for mandated reports that check out. They discipline the ones who didn't file. You did this in the right order. The county's own visit confirmed it within the week. Neglect substantiated. A mandated care plan ordered, professional medication management, no exceptions. My father, cooperative in front of the caseworker, had taken to laying my grandmother's pills out himself each morning in a saucer. Management is care in his gospel. It nearly killed her. A double dose on top of a new prescription, a nosebleed that wouldn't stop, a blood test at the county hospital that came back thin, dangerously past safe range. She recovered, but the hospital filed its own report on top of mine, and the board complaint, next to a substantiated finding, began aging badly, exactly as my lawyer predicted. Helen called that Friday. Item 8 is a letter, she said. It's addressed to you. It was dated 3 weeks before my mother died. Her handwriting downhill and tired, but hers. She wrote that she'd watched the disease of that house her whole marriage. Love kept in a ledger, entered and debited until every person in the family was a balance owed, and understood it too late to save me from it. That leaving had never been my sin. It was the first wise thing our family had done in 3 generations. Your hands were never the rent. Then Helen slid across the real weight of the day. Drafted papers putting the entire trust under my direction. All of it. The acres, the houses, the say. Take it, she said, and she didn't say it like temptation, which is what made it dangerous. No one alive would blame you. I confess I wanted it. Every cell. I saw myself at the head of that table deciding who eats. It played beautifully. That's how the ledger gets its next bookkeeper. I asked for a week. My father drove 2 hours to my porch that Wednesday, hat in his hands, and offered me the deal he'd built in his head. Come home. Tell Helen to renew the lease as it stood. 1 sentence and I was his daughter again. Priced out plain, a chair at the table at market rate. I told him I'd answer Friday. I didn't sleep that Thursday. I laid my mother's letter, the cookie tin, and the trust papers on my kitchen table and finally understood what all 7 years of October letters had actually been. Payments. I had never once stopped paying into that ledger. I'd just been keeping mine in stamps. By morning I had 1 page. My mother's math, not his. Friday, in a lawyer's office with no decoration but a print of the courthouse, Helen slid the signature block across and asked how I wanted to direct the trust. My father settled back, arms crossed, braced for whichever version of me he already understood. I decline, I read. Any appointment, ownership, or control of the trust, now and permanently. The room made no sound at all. I kept reading before anyone found their footing. An endowment funded from my directed share to convert the old packing barn into an adult day center and home care hub for the county. Nursing visits, transportation, a name on the door in block letters. The Eleanor Whitfield House. Rights of occupancy for my grandmother for life, carefully funded, my cousin hired on salary to run it. A new lease for the orchard at fair rate, phased in across 3 seasons so my brother could restructure with the bank instead of losing everything at auction. His name on it, with succession to his children. A lifetime tenancy in the main house for my father, and beside it, in the same clean language, no role in my grandmother's care, ever again. Not 1 acre. Not 1 say. And last, my own signature, waiving any personal claim on the land forever. Why? My brother finally managed, staring down the table. Because you stayed and I left, I told him. And it bought us the same nothing. One of us should get to buy something different. My father caught me on the courthouse steps alone. You think I'm a monster, he said. Not sorry. I want that noted. Then, unprompted, he told me the only story from his own childhood I'd ever heard. His father and an uncle splitting 80 acres in a bad year. A name never spoken again at any table, any funeral. He started the family proverb out loud. A family holds because one hand, and stopped mid-sentence, unable to finish it, hands working his hat brim, something like fear looking out of a face I'd only ever seen as granite. It didn't excuse anything. Both things got to be true. Helen came down the steps and held out a cream envelope, twin to mine, his name on it in a dead woman's hand. He looked at it a long moment, slid it into his coat pocket unopened, told me to tell my grandmother the groceries stopped Monday, and walked to his truck through the thin October sun. As far as I know, that seal has never been broken. Winter went to contractors. The barn got insulation, wide doors, windows facing the orchard rows. My grandmother was home by Thanksgiving, her medication schedule taped inside a cabinet where anyone could read it. We opened in April with 12 members, a retired schoolteacher who hadn't eaten lunch with another soul in years, 2 widowed farmers who became inseparable by May, my grandmother installed at the head table as self-appointed quality control. A 15-year-old named Sage sweeps up most afternoons and says she wants to be a nurse. My father still lives in the main house, under his caretaker's rent. He runs nothing. My brother runs the orchard now, the books open to the trust every autumn, the debt shrinking one honest season at a time. At harvest I can see him across the road from our windows, still straight-backed, still the tallest thing in the row. He has never once set foot in the Eleanor Whitfield house. This October, on the anniversary, I knelt in the dirt by the center's entrance and planted rose cuttings, my mother's roses, grown from the one she pressed into my hand on some long ago Sunday. Plant it where you are. I finally heard that sentence right. The driveway they line has no gate. Never will. And when I locked up that evening and looked back from the road, the whole barn sat there glowing in the dark, like a kitchen where nobody ever gets sent away from the table. Leaving that family was never my sin. It was the first thing I ever did that my mother would have called an inheritance.